My name is Elsa Kahn. It used to be Elsa Hessel. I was born in Kaisersesch, Germany, near Koblenz, in the year 1934. I lived there until I was almost 4 years old when my family and I immigrated into the United States and settled in New York City. I have very little recollections of Germany. The only thing that I can remember is the back of my grandfather's house, where there was a little stream running through. After many years, we did go back, and I did go to check out the stream. It was still there. However, it was much closer to the house than I had ever imagined. I thought it was way far away, but that was the interpretation of a 4-year-old. My parents decided to come to the United States because things were very tough in Europe, and these stories that I am going to tell are basically what they have told me because I can't remember, I was too young. My father had his license taken away from him. He was a cattle dealer, as most of the German Jews were. They no longer were able to get kosher meat. They were no longer able to shop at the general stores. They were not able to do a lot of things, as well as travel from where they lived to where their parents were. Life was very difficult for them, and they decided it was time to leave. Most of both my father and mother's families remained in Germany. They did not have the foresight that my parents did. We arrived in New York, and I'm not sure if it was through Hoboken or Ellis Island, and were met by a cousin of mine and her parents, and my cousin's aunt, who had come here several years before. My cousin had been here, I would guess several months before we were. We stayed in an apartment for a week that they had arranged for us, and then together with my cousin and her parents, we rented a 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens, and lived there for 2 years with my cousin Frances and her parents. It was a difficult time, 2 families living together. However, that was the only way we could afford it. I'm not sure that we could even afford it, but together they worked it out. We're still very close with this family. I'm in touch with her constantly, and we're like sisters because we did live together. However, after 2 years, things were a little better, and we each got our own apartment about a block away from each other. My father had a very difficult time finding a job. He had no occupation other than the cattle dealing, which was not something he could do in the United States, and the language barrier was also quite a problem. He went to work for a butcher, and it was very difficult because he was real mean to him. He was an immigrant, and he took advantage of that situation. He also had another problem. He would not work on Shabbos or the holidays, and this was something that he said right away at any interview he went to. I remember him telling the story that when he was not working, before he was working, that my mother was working, and I'll go into that a little later. She came home for work, and he says to her, "You made a good shidduch. You're out working, and I'm laying in bed because I'm frustrated and can't find a job." My mother, on the other hand, found a job going to work cleaning people's houses. That was the only thing that she knew because she also did not have any training after the 8th grade, I believe it was. In Europe, they had people clean their houses, and here she had to go back and clean other people's houses. The language barrier was quite a problem. If she had to go shopping for them, she would write it down phonetically and go to the store and would read it phonetically. And she remembers writing down daily newspaper, going to the grocery store trying to buy a daily newspaper. And they shook their head no, and she had no idea why she couldn't get it. But these people were very nice to her and helped her, and she was able to support our family with the little help my father at the beginning was able to give. We lived in Astoria for many years until I was married, and they lived there shortly thereafter. I can remember my first recollection was about a week or two after we arrived in the United States. My cousin and I were put into I guess it would be daycare, and her aunt was supposed to pick us up. However, when we came out, there was no one there to pick us up. We panicked because we couldn't communicate with anybody. We had no idea where to go. And finally, Aunt Laura did come and pick us up, and we were okay. My mother tells the story that the first time that I spoke English, I went outside to play and said, may I, or can I play with you? And she was very pleased that I was able to speak. When I went to school, I already knew a little English, and it became very common to me. I had no problem in schools because of the language barrier. I was here already a little over a year before I went to school. The language that we learned before the 5-year-old will always stick with us. Even though we don't speak German anymore, it does come back. We've gone back to Europe, and after a few days, the language comes back. Words that I had no idea I knew would come back to us, so that's something that's always in your brain, and you will always be able to use it. I remember one of the problems we had when we first came to the United States. There was a synagogue. We wanted to join. We had no money. They took us in as a charity case. They did not expect any money. We had no money, but I was able to go to Sunday school and Hebrew school, and we were taken in completely, no questions asked. After a short period of time, there was a small German community in Astoria. They started a synagogue which they called the Deutsche Gemeinde, which translated means the German congregation. My parents did not join. They felt that as long as the Astoria Center of Israel, which is the synagogue we belong to, took us in without money, and the fact that we could now afford to pay a little bit, we would remain with them. We were the only German Jewish family that remained with them, and I'm proud of my parents for doing that. We've gone back to the Astoria Center. It's full of emotions for us because we were there for many years. I was in contact with the Cantors still afterwards. My mother is buried in their cemetery. There's still ties to this. It was almost like a Jewish community because they had a room downstairs where the kids would play. We had a ping pong table, and we had youth organizations through them, and it was a big part of my parents' life. My parents were Shomer Shabbos. They felt very close to their religion. My father would not work on Shabbos or any of the holidays, and it was a good life. I never knew that, quote, we were poor, because all of our friends were the same boat. My parents would attend some of the activities of the, quote, Deutsche Gemeinde, unquote, but they were not members. I remember that for the high holidays you had to buy a seat. My father bought one in the downstairs synagogue as opposed to the main sanctuary because it was much cheaper. I would sit on his lap because we had one seat. And we would play outside and inside just as teenagers would, or even younger. We didn't sit through the whole services. Um, we still have contact with the Historia Center of Israel, and they're almost closed because of lack of Jewish population in the area. The other synagogue that was there, it was Bethel, they have closed. I understand that the building was sold, and that's part of a history that's from Astoria. I can remember one other thing as far as Judaism is concerned. There was some anti-Semitic situation. I was playing rope outside. You know how you jump rope with a bunch of kids, and one of the kids said, "You dirty Jew." Well, I took the rope and started hitting her on it. And that's the only fight I ever remember being in. And we really had a fist fight. Went home and I was a little bit of all tagged and ripped and so on. And my mother asked me, "What have you been doing?" And I told her, and she said, "That's okay." Normally she would always say to me, "Don't ever start a fight, don't ever fight." But this she accepted. We lived in Astoria, and there were very few people that were Jewish. It was not a Jewish neighborhood. It was basically an Italian neighborhood. There was still a smattering of Jews. Today, most of them are gone. All right.
What did your father do other than, you said, work part-time in a meat market?
He worked for the meat market, I think something like 8, 9 months, and then felt he just could not take it anymore. He then went to work for Reuben Company, which was a fat rendering company, and he drove to the different butchers, picked up the meat, the fat, the renderings, and they took it back to the factory where it was turned into soap. He was there for many, many years. The owner was Jewish, so he understood that my father did not work on Shabbos. He was a helper. He was not a driver. He did not know how to drive. And really, at the age he was at, he did not want to learn anymore, even though he could have made more money. He didn't make a lot of money, but we were happy. And my mother did not work after the first few years. She stayed home and took care of us, took care of me. I was an only child. One of the other things that I'm thinking about now, when my parents were married in 1932, she became pregnant in 1933, and people asked her, "How can you bring a child into this world under these circumstances with the Hitler situation and such?" And she said they never had another child because of it. However, they were glad that they had had me. So.
Did you have any other relatives living in that area other than the cousin that you had mentioned?
Yes, around the corner from me, my aunt lived. That was my father's sister. And they had 2 daughters. We're still in touch with them. Back and forth. We did a lot of visiting back and forth, and especially on a Shabbos or a Yontif. My mother had another sister. They lived in Washington Heights. Washington Heights was a place where all the German Jews lived. However, again, we did not want to choose to live in that area. We chose to live a little differently. My aunt and uncle around the corner, they've been dead for many years. In fact, my father was the last one of all of his relatives to die. My father was one of 12. Out of the 12, 3 came to the United States. My aunt that lived around the corner from us, Uncle Herman, who lived in close to where Harlem was, on 100th Street in Manhattan. and my father. Just the 3 out of the 12 came out. My mother was one of 8, and there were 4 that came out, 2 brothers and a sister. Not all of these people perished in the Holocaust. Some had died previously, earlier, from other causes.
Did the relatives that came over on your father's side and mother's side, did any of them come before you did?
Some came all within 38, pretty close. It may have been a few months before, but basically we all came in 38. We were all brought over by David Kaufman, who is a merchant in Grand Island, Nebraska, and responsible for over 100 people coming to the United States. He gave everybody a $50 check, guaranteed their support, was instrumental in saving many, many people's lives. Marcel has interviewed and has mentioned him already. I will repeat that he was an absolutely wonderful person, saving all these people's lives. He came to New York for a 50th wedding anniversary. This was another relative, but it was my mother's aunt and uncle, and really one of the, in fact, I think the only 50th wedding anniversary in the whole family. And my mother was the only one who could not go because she was sick that day. So everybody else was there. David Kaufman felt that he wanted to see my mother, who was her first cousin. So he came to the house. I think if the President of the United States had come, it wouldn't have been more festive and preparations and what have you. But he did come to our house one time, and there was unbelievable preparations for what was going on. Marcel and I went to see him in Grand Island when he was very sick. We'd gone to see him previously on several occasions also. But when we went to Grand Island, there was some dementia there, and he did come out of it, and he said, "Oh," when I explained who I was, "Oh, I know who you are. You're my favorite cousin Martha's daughter." However, since then I've learned everybody was his, quote, favorite cousin.
And he probably meant that too.
Probably, but he was just a wonderful person. He was married for many years to Celia. She passed away. He then remarried someone who was not Jewish. They had no children. He passed away into the 80s. And his wife then befriended the city priest, and when she passed away, all the money went to the church, which was unfortunate because there was a lot there. He also was instrumental in helping Mr. Mangelson start his business. I went in there one day and I happened to see a picture of Uncle David on there, and I questioned what it was doing there. And they said, "Oh, he was the one who helped us and started us out. I got all my business experience working in Kaufman's 5 and 10 in Grand Island, and he was very helpful to me." Whether or not his picture's still up there, I don't know, but it was at one time. He also, when he was, I think about 70 or 75, a cousin and I in New York contacted most of the people that he had brought to this country. We had an artist draw up a tree of life and presented it to him. He in turn had copies of this made and sent to everybody on the tree. We had some money left over, so we planted trees in Israel in his name, and he in turn, for every tree we planted 2 more. We all owe our life to him and will be eternally grateful.
Do you have any recollection at all of how your parents were able to come over? Was this Mr. Kaufman responsible for transporting the family over or securing papers?
Securing papers, he was able to um, prov- to say that he would provide for our support if we were not able to. What correspondence went on between them, I don't know. I have no idea. I do have some papers that shows that he signed the affidavit and was willing to support us. However, none of the relatives ever went back on it, and he had not, uh, never had to spend a penny. Um, the organization, I can't think of the name of it right now, Hayes was also available for support for anybody. However, as far as I know, no one in our family ever received any support from Hayes, but it was available to us.
Now, tell me how you met Marcel.
Well, Marcel and I played together as children. We lived in a town called Kaisers Esch. His aunt and uncle lived in Kaisers Esch, and he would come and spend several weeks there. We played together as children. I understand, went into the woods. They couldn't find us, and uh, this was just, I was maybe 3 years old or 2 years old, and he was five or along that way. He went back to his town. They came to the United States in 1938 on the New Amsterdam, on the maiden voyage of the New Amsterdam. My parents and I came on the second voyage of the New Amsterdam. We settled in New York. They came to Omaha, Nebraska, and we did not see each other or even know of each other until 1954 when he graduated college and took a trip with his parents, stopping in New York and visiting my father-in-law, to be my father-in-law's cousin, who were friends of my parents. The parents didn't know each other. My parents went to see his parents and said, "There's a nice young man there," and I said, "So what?" But however, we did get together, and we corresponded, and he joined the service and used to come up and see us, and we became engaged, and he called his mother, and she says, "To who?" Because she thought he was coming to New York to visit the relatives. She never had any indication that he was coming up to see me, and he would come up, and I'd have a date with somebody else, which I would cancel because he had a pretty neat uniform, and that's the beginning of the end there. We married in 1956. He was in the service. We lived in Georgia. I lived there for 7 months. He had been there earlier when he was discharged. We drove back through to New York and Omaha, and we've lived here ever since.
When did your parents come to Omaha? Or did your father? When did he come to Omaha?
My parents were planning on coming to Omaha because I was their only daughter. My father was going to retire at 65. In fact, Marcel and I had picked out a little house for them, literally a little house not far from where we were living. My mother became ill. They decided it was not the time to move. She passed away in 1960, in September of 1960. My father moved here right afterwards. She was sick for maybe 6 months, and just as soon as she was buried, he gave up his apartment and moved to Omaha. He lived with Marcel and I and our children for 18 years until he passed away in 1978. He did not want to live by himself. He was wonderful to have. I could not have lived with my mother. My father was wonderful. He never interfered. He was there. He was just a nice, very pleasant man, and we thoroughly enjoyed having him live with us. The children enjoyed him. It was not something that is done every day. In fact, it's not done very much, but he lived with us for the 18 years.
Did he enjoy his years in Omaha, especially being with you and his
He
grandchildren?
absolutely loved it. He was a little bit unhappy when he first came because he didn't know anyone, and I encouraged him to go to the Jewish Community Center where he would meet people. He loved to dance, and as time went by, he found every day a different place to go dance. And this was his thing. He met many people who were delightful to him, and he would do his own transportation. We lived not far from a bus. He would get up and he would go, come back, and he was really a pleasure to have with us. He got along beautifully with Marcel and the other way around too. And like I said before, I think one of the reasons was he never interfered in decisions. We would be at the dinner table and Marcel would say, "Tell your daughter this," and he would say, "She's your wife, you tell her." But that was the basis of our relationship. He was just a very dear man.
What was it like, a girl that had grown up in wild and woolly New York, to move to Omaha, Nebraska?
Well, I was never wild and woolly, and I didn't realize that New York was New York. Um, this is home now. I'm happy here. I would not ever plan to go back to New York permanently. I'd love to go back to visit, see some of the friends or relatives I have there, which are very few anymore. They've either moved out or passed away. I love to go back as a tourist. But this is home. I love the life here. It's what you make of it. Everything is available. We've had a good life here. We're content, and I really would never want to go back to, as you said, wild and woolly, but that's not me.
Tell me a little bit about your trips going back to Germany, going back to your hometown. What were your feelings?
They're very difficult to explain. We've gone back on several occasions. I think the first time we went back, Marcel and I, people all said, "It wasn't me, it was the other guy." That was the basis of all of this. I remember one time going back to where my mother lived, which is Ach, which is near Trier, which is near the Luxembourg border. There was a little old hunched man that we met, and he started talking about things that my parents or my grandparents, I guess it was my grandparents, had, and he didn't know what happened to him, and I had no idea what he was talking about. When we came back, I was told that he was given some of the valuables to bury, and they've never come up anymore, whether or not he sold them. This is what he was talking about. That was the guilt in him. Had he not said anything, nobody would have been the wiser. One of the other things, we walked into that town and we asked where the Levy house was, and they said, "Ach, das Judenhaus," which translated means, "Oh, the Jew house." I don't think it was anti-Semitism. That was just what it was called. There are many streets in Germany or in Europe which is the Judenstraße, Judenstraße, and it's just a name. I don't think it means what it implies. Everybody, as I said it wasn't me, it was the other guy. We went back to Marcel's hometown, my mother and father's hometown. We were with another couple, their hometown. They have the same background as we. Again, this is that same cousin I was referring to. Her husband was also born in Germany, and we've gone back together with them, and it's been very emotional. Germany is a beautiful country, but the Germans themselves, I think there's still some anti-Semitism there, and always will be. At least in our lifetime. You look at these people and you say, "You son of a bitch, what you did to my family." But it's not all of them. The younger generation hopefully has learned its lesson and that there's less anti-Semitism there than the older generation.
Were you able to find any cemeteries where you had family buried?
Yes, we went to the same city that I just talked about, Ah. There was a cemetery on the way up to the little town that my grandfather was supposedly buried there. When we stopped there, there were no headstones whatsoever, just one headstone with everybody's name on it. The story we heard about it was that somebody had taken all the headstones and made a silo out of the cement. The story goes on to say that he was on top of the silo, fell in, and died, which was justification, if you want to call it that. We heard that from two, three different people. We heard that in Mainz from a school class we had seen there, and one of the little kids, who may have been 8 or 10 years old, the teacher was telling us that one of the kids, who was about 8 or 10 years old, told him that they had to go home. One of the assignments from school was to ask Oma and Opa for an experience from the Holocaust. And he did come in and say his Opa died falling off of a solo. And we've had the story documented on several other occasions. However, there was just the one, somebody had made the one headstone and had everybody's name printed on it. We went through the town that Marcel and I played in, Kaisers Esch, to the cemetery there. One of the inhabitants of the town was a single man who was self-taught in English, and he had tried to contact Marcel's father many years ago. Marcel wrote to him, and we had been in correspondence with him. He, on his own, took care of the cemetery there. Marcel and I, would send him a, quote, Christmas present every year because he was not being paid. We tried to bring some things to him the few times we did see him. We've lost contact. He did not respond the last few times. We felt he was doing something on his own to help his restitution, let's put it that way. But we did go to several other cemeteries other than just Marcel and I's ancestors.
What is your overall feeling when you've gone back to Germany?
Very mixed emotions. Many people have questioned how we can go back. Some people won't buy cars or anything manufactured in Germany. We did not know enough of our background that we wanted to find out. Maybe it's going back to your roots that we wanted to go. We feel very mixed about it. I think we went to a restaurant in Trier one time, owned by a Jewish man, and we got to talking to him, and we asked him, how can you live here as a Jew? People question us how we can even visit here, but how can you live here? And his answer to us was, why should we let Hitler get away with making Germany Judenrein, which is Jew-free? He felt he wanted to stay there to try to balance Hitler's comments. It's scenery-wise, it's a beautiful country. People are very friendly if they can, but it's not any place that I would ever want to live. We've gone back only just to see, quote, our roots, and it's a very mixed emotions.
Were you ever able to locate anyone in your hometown that remembered your family?
Many people, not anymore because anybody that would know us at this stage is gone. But we have one of the interesting experiences that going back to my father's hometown, which was Hamburg, which is real close to Kaisers Esch. We drove into the town, this goes back many years, and stopped to ask directions, and it turned out that Marcel happened to go into the post office. And it went through the town like wildfire. Somebody's looking for the Hessel house. These people came running up to us and wanting to know how we were, how the different people, my father's siblings, this one and that one, where they were. And here come three elderly gentlemen in big overalls. And Marcel took some pictures of them, and we wrote down their names. They said they remembered my father, and so when we got home, we showed the pictures to my father, and he says, Gottsinn, die Altgeber, which translated, my God, did they get old, never realizing that he had also gotten older in the maybe 40 years or whatever length of time it happened to be. But I've forgotten what you asked me, where I went off the tangent.
Well, I want to know the feeling, and did you run into anyone there
Yes.
that knew of the family?
When we went back to when my mother was born, people would discuss her siblings, her aunts, her uncles. The town had possibly maybe 5 or 6 Jewish houses in it, and they were all related to my mother's side of the family. And these people knew everyone. It's not like in the United States. Here you live in a house for 10, 15 years, you move and sell it and buy something else. Here, generations after generation after generation live in the same house, so they all know each other. And my parents did come from small towns. They called Dorf, which is a very small little town, maybe 50 families, if we're lucky. My mother's town was a little larger. That may have been 60 or 70 families. However, most of them were related to my mother.
Now, can you tell me a little bit about your children?
We have 2 boys. Bob is the older one. He's married to Roxanne Kahn. He has 2 children, a 14-year-old girl who was bar mitzvahed last year, and a 10-year-old boy. Ken is the younger one. He was married, no longer is, to Lisa Manvitz, and has 3 children, 8-year-old twins and a 5-year-old boy. And all of them live in Omaha.
So do you get to see them?
Most of them are pretty busy, and we did when they were smaller. We got to see a lot more of them. But young children are busy with their different activities.
How would you sum up the years with Marcel, your years with Omaha, based upon your experience of having been born in Germany?
We live as Americans. We're proud to be Americans. We have had a good life. We lived in Georgia for several months when we first got married, as I mentioned before, and came right to Omaha. Marcel has worked very hard. We've tried to give a good life to our family. We have a very good relationship with both of our families. His mother is still here, and we see her frequently. She's at the Blumpton home. We've had a very good life. He's worked very hard. I've tried to work hard too. I've never had since we've had the kids, paying job, but I've tried working for us, and it's been a good life. Both of us are retired. We hope to travel a lot. We've done a lot of traveling. It's been a good life.
In your travels, Ilsa, have you come upon any instances, being Jewish, that you met with any German tourists that questions arose?
You know the story, so I will repeat it. I'm glad you asked about it. We were on a cruise in the Mediterranean, and I was just sitting on deck reading, and there was some people next to us who were obviously German. They spoke German in the true German, not as a tourist, and I never let on that I knew that they were what they were saying, and I really paid no attention. Most of them left except there was one woman that remained there. She was reading and drinking a cup of coffee. She spilled some coffee on her, hot coffee on her, and instinctively I went over and I said, "Darf ich Ihnen helfen?" which is, "May I help you?" And we got her okay. She wasn't burned too much, but she was okay. And then she said, "Thank you very much." And she says, "Oh, you speak German very well. Where did you learn your German?" I said, "In school." I wasn't about to admit that I was born in Germany. I felt it was an instinctive answer. She says, "No, you don't speak German like a German student. You speak German like you have known it all your life." She said, "Were you born in Germany?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "When? And how old were you? When did you go to the United States?" I said, "1938. She says, "Oh my, sind Sie eine jüdische Frau? Are you a Jewish woman?" And I said, well, she got tears in her eyes. And she said, "I apologize to you, from me to you on a personal basis, what we as Germans did to you as Jews." The tears were streaming down her face. She was very sincere in her feelings, and we had a little discussion about it. She said that for her 25th, she was maybe 15 years younger than I, maybe a little more. She said that she and her husband went to Israel in order to spend a little money in Israel because of her guilt feelings of what Hitler did to the Jews. We had quite a conversation. She gave me her name, her address, her phone number, that I should come visit her. And the rest of the cruise, she always came over to me. And one of the questions I asked her, "Are there many people in Germany that feel as you do?" And her answer was, in her church, most of them do. She does not know some of the other situations or different areas, but her church felt very guilty about what has happened, and hopefully, she said, most of her generation does. She doesn't think that's the case, but she would hope so. So,
Very interesting story.
yeah, it was, and it left me feeling, wow. So, this is a copy of the bill that was used on the Holland American line for my parents and myself. Not a copy, it's the original bill. It lists my mother, father, and myself in this. We arrived in July of 1938. The bill amounted to $116.50 per person for my parents, $58.25 for me, which was half of that, a total of $291.25. That was a lot of money back then. Where my parents got the money from, I don't know. Perhaps some of their relatives helped them, or they may have saved it up. However, it is the Holland American line. We've been on it since then, and were able to sit at the captain's table one night, possibly because we had mentioned we were on the original Rotterdam on this. It was the New Amsterdam was the name of the ship, and we've been on the New Amsterdam since then.
But it was a different.
The trip was third class, and I know we had a little pot in the room that there were no bathrooms in the room, and at night, if you had to go to the bathroom, you used the little pot. A friend of my parents was on the same voyage coming over. He left his wife back in Europe. She came over later. He happened to be, his name was Oscar Meyer, not the Oscar Meyer, but another person named that. He babysat me one night, at least as the story goes, while my parents went up on deck to do whatever it was they were going to do. And my parents wanted to pay him for babysitting, and he said, "No, invite me to her wedding." and they did. This happens to be an affidavit of support. It says that David Kaufman will support us if we are not able to on our own. It gives his address in Grand Island. It lists my parents and myself and our ages, and that we came from Kaisersesch, Germany, which is the town we lived in. It also says that he is a merchant with earning about $200 a week, and his total assets are quite substantial. He signed it saying that he would support us, and it was documented in 1938. We became citizens in 1943. My parents had applied for their own citizenship papers and questioned whether or not I was included in theirs. They said I would be included until I was, and I don't remember if it was 18 or 21 years old, and at that time I would have to get my own papers if I did not get it at this time with my parents. They decided to apply for my citizenship papers at that time, and I distinctly remember being in front of what probably was a judge, and he looked down at my application and looked up at me saying, blonde hair, green eyes, and kind of indicating that I was the person who was described on the application. We were able to get my citizenship papers, and we went home on the subway and celebrated by buying a waffle ice cream sandwich. That was our celebration that I had just become a citizen of the United States of America, and that's something I'm very proud of. In school, when I was, let's see, 1946, I must have been 9 years old. I remember that I had just become the citizen of the United States, and we wrote a composition entitled Why I Am Proud to Be an American. I won the prize for $25 and was very, very proud of being an American citizen and still am. You wouldn't know. This is the Heiratsprobe of my parents. They were married in 1932. It happens that it was an arranged marriage, as most of them were at that particular time. My parents were not youngsters anymore. They were in their early and mid-30s, and this application for their marriage certificate has the area that they were in, the city that they were in. My father was listed as a fee handler, which is a cattle dealer, and my mother as not having any career. Her maiden name was Levy. My father's name was Sigmund Hessel, and my mother was Martha Levy, and then became Martha Hessel. This is the other side of the form we just showed you. It's a continuation of it. And then at the very bottom, it's got the stamp from Trier, which is the city that they were married in. It's got the Hakenkreise, which is the German swastika on their stamp. This is a passport, my mother's passport from Germany into the United States. It has some information on it, where she was born, her birth date, what her profession was, and several other things. Also, at the bottom, it says Kinder, which is children, and I'm listed on her passport. Obviously, I did not have my own passport. It also has the German swastika stamp on it that makes it official. That was a picture of my mother at that time, and they used this. I kept a record of it, and we also have a copy of my father's, which we'll show you in a minute. This is my father's passport with the same type of information on it that my mother's had: his birth date, where he lived, his profession, etc. And obviously, I'm not listed on it. It also has the German swastika, which is the official seal of it. Um, it's a picture of my dad on it, and I never did know him with hair on. This is a certificate of literacy in my mother's name. It was given to her from PS 166, Borough of Queens, in October 1944. She became a citizen in 1943 and took lessons. Now, I remember that people coming to the house, a woman, to teach her, both my parents, English so that they would be able to communicate. PS 166, she went to take a test so that she could vote, number one, and also, in order to vote, she had to have this certificate of literacy. It was 166 is the same school I went to as a child. These are notices of the petition that was filed for naturalization papers of my parents. Obviously, we had to send these in and make some kind of an application. They notified us that it was to be in October 6th and October 20th that they would be accepted, as it turned out to be, that they would be accepted as citizens of the United States of America.